let us see how each process is allocated the CPU as per first come first serve scheduling algorithm. Okay. So according to this example, there are three processes: process P1, process P2, and process P3. For each process, CPU burst time is given here. Okay. Let us take CPU burst time in seconds. Okay. So what does it mean? Process P1 needs a maximum of 24 seconds to be executed in the CPU. Process P2 needs a maximum of 3 seconds. Process P3 needs a maximum of 3 seconds. All three processes are available in ready queue, but according to example, P1 has given first. So P1 is available in the beginning of the queue, followed by P2 and followed by P3. Three processes are available. Now CPU allocation. How CPU is allocated for all these processes? For that, as we already know, we have to know about the Gantt chart. Okay, this is Gantt chart for process allocation. CPU allocation for each process. Okay. According to first come first serve algorithm, P1 will be getting the CPU first. So at time 0, because there is no arrival time is given in this example. Okay, arrival time is not given in this example. So by default, all three processes are available at time 0 in the ready queue. So first P1 will be allocated to the CPU. So at time 0, P1 enters the CPU. What is the CPU burst time for P1? 24 seconds. So P1 will use the CPU for 24 seconds. After 24 seconds, it will complete its job and come out of the CPU. So P1 is removed from the. Once P1 is completed, next available job in the queue is P2. So P2 will enter into the CPU. P2 will be executing for another 3 seconds because CPU burst time for P2 is 3 seconds. So P2 will execute for 3 seconds. So the time will become 27. Finally, P3 will enter into the queue. So P3 will complete its job after 3 seconds because CPU burst time for P3 is 3 seconds. Up to this, okay? Very simple. At ready queue, three processes are available: P1, P2, P3 in that order. So by default, P1 will enter into the CPU first, followed by P2 and P3. So according to Gantt chart, at the time 0, P1 enters the CPU, executing for 24 seconds and coming out of the CPU. Then P2 enters, executing for another 3 seconds. P3 enters, executing for another 3 seconds. Okay. Now we have to calculate the waiting time and the turnaround time for each process. Already we know the formula of waiting time and the turnaround time. First let us go to the turnaround time. Okay. What is the formula for turnaround time? Turnaround time equal to completion time minus arrival time. Correct? Turnaround time equal to completion time minus arrival time. Okay. Now what is the turnaround time for process P1? P1 what a completion time is 24. 24 minus P1 what arrival time is, there is no arrival time is given in this example. So 24 minus 0 equal to 24. So turnaround time for process P1 is 24. Okay, what is process P2 turnaround time? Completion time is 27 seconds. See, listen, even though P2 enters the CPU after 24 seconds, it is executing only 3 seconds in the CPU, but arrival time is 0. Correct? Arrival time is 0. So from 0, it is waiting 24 seconds in the ready queue and executing 3 seconds in the CPU. So total time taken after arrival and before completion is considered as turnaround time. Okay, so turnaround time equal to completion time minus arrival time. What is the completion time? 27 minus 0 equal to 27. Okay, turnaround time for P3, 30 minus 0 equal to 30. This is how to calculate the turnaround time. Okay, formula for turnaround time is time between completion and arrival at ready queue, not CPU. Okay, arrival time at ready queue and completion time from the CPU. That is considered as turnaround time. According to this, P1, P2, P3, completion time is 24, 27 and 30, no arrival time. So this is the turnaround time for each process. Okay. Now what is the average turnaround time? Average turnaround time, very simple to calculate with 3. Okay, 24 plus 27 plus 30 divided by total number of process, 3. Okay. You can quickly go through and check what is the average turnaround time. Okay. The turnaround time will become 27. Kindly check your answer. This is total total turnaround time divided by total number of process. 24 plus 27 plus 30 divided by 3 equal to 27. Okay. Now let us go to the waiting time for each process and average waiting time. So what is waiting time? Generally speaking, the time taken by a particular process in the ready queue but not in the CPU after its arrival time. Okay. Consider a process arrives at the ready queue at time 0 and it is getting CPU at 10 seconds. So what is the waiting time? 0 to 10. So for 10 seconds it is waiting for the CPU. So you should not consider the time the process spent at the CPU, but you have to consider the time process spent at the ready queue after its arrival time until its completion time. Okay, let us consider logically. So as everybody knows, all 3 processes arrives at the ready queue at time t0. Okay, for example at 0 second. Okay. Now P1 enters into the CPU at 0 seconds. So how much time P1 is waiting? Logically speaking, it is not waiting for any time because at the time t0 it is coming to ready queue. At the time 0 it is entering to the CPU. So there is no waiting time for process P1. So how to calculate according to the formula? What is the waiting time formula? Waiting time equal to completion time minus arrival time plus CPU burst time. Okay. Let us consider for process P1. What is the completion time for process P1? 24 minus what is the arrival time? 0 plus what is CPU burst time? 24. So 0 plus 24 equal to 24 minus 24 equal to 0. Now same thing you are considering for process P2. So what is the completion time for process P2? 27 minus arrival time, all 3 processes arrival time is 0 plus CPU burst time is 3. So 27 minus 3 equal to 24. Okay, like that what is process P2's waiting time? 30 minus 0 plus equal to 27. Okay, logically speaking, see from 0 to 24 seconds. Okay, 0 to 24 seconds, P2 is waiting in ready queue. That is what we are referring as 24. Okay. From 0 to 27 seconds, P3 is waiting in ready queue. So you are getting the answer. But P1 is entering to the CPU as soon as it arrives at ready queue because CPU is free. So there is no waiting time for P1. Okay. Now what is average waiting time? Average waiting time equal to 0 plus 24 plus 27 divided by 3. That's all. Okay, check out the answer.